read the entire story again.
Madame Patarini and the Great Mormon Panic. Cross-dressing, BYU soaking, and the battle for eternal gender. It was a regular Tuesday in Salt Lake City, and inside the church administration building, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 gathered for their weekly emergency damage control session. Seated in plush chairs and sipping lukewarm postum, Russell M. Nelson, Dallin H. Oakes, and Jeffrey R. Holland were deep in discussion about important church matters, such as how to market 5-gallon buckets of freeze-dried green beans, why modesty rules don't apply to ballet performances, and how to legally justify paying themselves as volunteers. Then a frazzled church historian burst into the room, eyes wild, clutching an ancient Salt Lake Theater program like it was a sealed portion of the gold plates. "Brethren," he gasped, "we have a situation." Nelson waved a hand. "Unless it's about a new medical breakthrough I can name after myself, I don't have time." The historian gulped. "Sir, it's about Brigham Young's son." Oakes adjusted his glasses of judgment. "Which one?" There were dozens. The historian held up a faded playbill from 1895, featuring a dazzling soprano in full Victorian glamour. Holland squinted. "A woman?" The historian coughed. "No, sir, that is Madame Patarini, also known as Brigham Morris Young." Silence. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Nelson sputtered. "Brigham Young's son was a cross-dressing opera star?" Oakes finished, his upper lip curling into a frown so tight it could hold tithing receipts. Holland turned red, slammed a copy of The Family, a proclamation to the world on the table, and bellowed, "Well, this won't do! We just banned gender nonconformity, and now we find out that Brigham Young's own son wore dresses in public?" A nervous apostle raised a trembling hand. "Do we excommunicate him? He's been dead for over a century!" Oakes barked, slamming his Doctrine and Covenants onto the table so hard it knocked over a framed photo of Cleon Skousen. Nelson rubbed his temples. All right, damage control," Oakes nodded. "We need a new policy. From this moment forward. 1, no missionary may wear a dress under any circumstances. Not even for pioneer reenactments. 2, no temple recommends for cross-dressers. The Lord does not approve of men in petticoats. 3, we must assure members that Brigham Morris Young was absolutely, positively straight and sealed in the temple." Just then, the lights flickered, and a cold draft blew through the room. A faint soprano voice filled the air. "Oh, boys." The spirit of Madame Patarini twirled in, decked out in lace, satin gloves, and a pearl-studded bonnet. She winked at the apostles and dramatically fanned herself. "You're all just late to the party," the brethren screamed. Holland threw a copy of The Miracle of Forgiveness at the apparition. Nelson clutched his pacemaker. Oakes muttered, "This is just like Obergefell v. Hodges all over again." Then, just as suddenly, Madame Patarini vanished, leaving behind a single pink feather, and a faith crisis so large it could not be eternally sealed away. The First Presidency sat frozen, staring at the feather gently floating to the ground. No one dared to move. Finally, Nelson took a deep breath. "All right, we handle this the way we handle everything." Holland nodded. "Ignore it and hope it goes away?" "Exactly." The brethren sighed in relief, until a BYU honor code enforcer rushed in, waving a clipboard in terror. "Sirs, we have a bigger problem," Oakes groaned. "Bigger than Brigham Young's cross-dressing son?" "Yes, sir." The enforcer gulped. "It's about BYU soaking." Nelson's eyebrows shot up. "You mean sulking?" "No, sir." The enforcer's face turned red. "Soaking, where BYU students insert themselves into their girlfriends but don't move. Because if they don't thrust, it's not sex." Silence. Holland's eye twitched. "This is allowed? It's technically not against the law of chastity." Nelson groaned. "Brigham Young's son wore a dress, and now BYU students have legalistic intercourse loopholes?" Oakes flipped open a temple interview questionnaire. "We need a new question, something direct." He scribbled furiously. "Do you now or have you ever engaged in soaking?" Holland nodded grimly. "Make sure to add a follow-up question about thrusting." Nelson sighed, rubbing his temples. "At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Brigham Morris Young invented soaking, too." Just then, the pink feather floated up again, twirling over their heads. A final whisper echoed through the chamber. "Lighten up, boys. It's just a little theater." And with that, a gentle giggle filled the room, and the lights went out. Epilogue. The Curse of Madame Patarini. In the following weeks, strange things continued to happen. A young women's leader accidentally bore testimony that gender is fluid over the pulpit before
Continue reading.
That night, the brethren barely slept. Every shadow in the church office building felt a little too long. Every creak in the hallway, a little too theatrical. Nelson tossed and turned, dreaming of a grand stage where Madame Patarini stood at the pulpit, singing a glorious soprano rendition of I Am a Child of God, while wearing a full sequined ball gown. Oakes awoke in a cold sweat, convinced he had heard the swish of a satin skirt right outside his door. Holland, unable to take it anymore, stormed into the office the next morning, threw down a stack of tithing reports, and bellowed, "We have to end this!" Nelson nodded. Agreed. We need a new church-wide policy adjustment. Something final. Something that makes it clear that cross-dressing is an abomination before the Lord. Oakes, still frazzled from his haunted dreams, muttered, "We need to call it the Young Doctrine. Since it was Brigham Young's son, we can reframe it as a warning to the saints." Holland perked up. "Oh, that's good. That's very good. Make it sound official." A meeting was called. Apostles flew in. They gathered in the temple, prayed, and then crafted their response. New church revelation. The Young Doctrine. 1. No man shall wear a dress, even in jest, nor shall he twirl, prance, or otherwise appear overly light on his feet. 2. Temple interviews shall now include the question, hast thou ever in this life or the premortal existence engaged in behavior unbecoming of thy divine masculinity? 3. Soaking shall be reclassified as heavy petting with intent, which shall now result in a 1-month suspension of temple privileges. 4. Any reports of unexplained pink feathers appearing in church buildings must be reported immediately to the Strengthening Church Members Committee for further investigation. The document was prepared, it was signed, it was ready to be read aloud at General Conference. But then it happened. The conference center incident. The brethren arrived at the pulpit, wearing their darkest suits and most serious faces. The cameras rolled. The tabernacle choir hummed softly in the background. Nelson stood. He adjusted his microphone. He opened his mouth to speak. And then a grand organ chord rang out. From nowhere, a voice, clear, high, and powerful, began to sing. I am a child of God. Gasps. Murmurs. Panic. Apostles looked around in terror. The choir director fainted. Elder Bednar clutched his pearls. And then, descending from the rafters in a magnificent shimmering gown draped in silk and lace, Madame Patarini appeared. She landed gracefully in front of the pulpit. She lifted her fan, dramatically snapped it open, and let out a long, slow sigh. Well, darlings, I simply couldn't let you have all the fun. Nelson choked on his water. Oakes tried to dive under the podium. Holland, eyes wide, began aggressively mouthing a silent prayer. Madame Patarini strolled forward, her heels clicking against the floor. Honestly, boys, you've spent 2 centuries trying to erase me. It's exhausting. She gestured dramatically to the audience, her gown glowing under the lights. You tried to hide me. You tried to bury me. And now, here I am, back on center stage. She winked at the camera. I have to say, though, soaking? Really? That's your big theological loophole? She giggled. My dears, if you're going to break the rules, at least have the decency to do it with a little style. The audience sat in stunned silence. Patarini turned back to the apostles, hands on her hips. Now, are we done pretending? Or do I need to put on a full musical number? The silence stretched. Then a sound, a single quiet clap. From the front row, an old woman in her Sunday best, a faithful Relief Society sister, had started applauding. Another clap, a few chuckles, and then a standing ovation. The entire conference center erupted in cheers. Elder Uchtdorf, overcome with emotion, jumped onto his seat and started leading the wave. The BYU students in the choir began voguing. Even the organist, with a knowing smile, launched into a Broadway-style overture. The The apostles, white as their pressed shirts, had no choice but to sit and watch. Madame Paterini flourished her feathered fan one last time, turned to Nelson, and with a final devastating wink, whispered, "See you at the after party, boys." And with that, she disappeared in a cloud of pink satin and divine fabulousness. Final church statement, issued 2 days later. After much prayer and fasting, the First Presidency has decided to suspend all discussion regarding Brigham Young's posterity. We affirm that gender is eternal and unchanging, except in cases where Brigham Young's family history might contradict that statement. Furthermore, all pink feathers found in meeting houses are to be considered a test of faith and should be ignored. But the members knew the truth. Madame Paterini had returned, and she wasn't.
She's not perfect. I am. Continue.
The aftermath of the Great Conference catastrophe. The days following Madame Paterini's grand return were chaotic. The brethren were in full crisis mode. Every committee, from the correlation department to the strengthening church members committee, had been activated. Emergency Zoom meetings were scheduled at all hours of the night with one urgent question on everyone's mind. How do we explain this? Elder Bednar, still pale from the conference center incident, suggested immediate disciplinary action against, well, someone. "We must launch an investigation," he declared. "Someone in the tabernacle choir must have been in league with the spirit. I suggest interrogating the altos first." Elder Renland, who had already downed 3 cans of Diet Coke, sighed. "Are we sure that was actually a spirit? Or was it just a well-funded Salt Lake City drag queen with access to harness technology?" "Blasphemy!" Oakes shouted, banging his fist on the table. Nelson, shaken but composed, cleared his throat. "Brethren, we need to be strategic. We can't just admit that Brigham Young's son is a cross-dressing poltergeist. It would look bad." Holland muttered, "Well, it looks worse when he descends from the rafters at General Conference like the Phantom of the Tabernacle." Silence. Elder Stevenson, ever the problem solver, brightened. "Maybe we just say it was an angel?" Apostles blinked. Oakes massaged his temples. "We can't just invent a new angel every time we have a PR disaster. We already have Moroni, Nephi, and that one we don't talk about from Kirtland." Nelson stood, rubbing his chin. "I've received personal revelation." The room leaned in. "We don't address it." Oakes furrowed his brow. "You mean ignore it?" Nelson nodded. "Yes, we deny. We deflect. We pretend it never happened." But, President," Uchtdorf said, still shaken from leading the wave in the conference center, "there's footage. It's already on YouTube." Nelson's eye twitched. "Damage control initiatives? Begin." By Monday morning, the church PR department was working overtime. The LDS newsroom issued a clarification statement, insisting that there had been no paranormal interference at General Conference, and that certain online rumors of spectral cross-dressing are unverified and should be avoided. BYU immediately issued a revised honor code, adding the following. 1. Students must not engage in theatrical performances that blur gender roles. 2. No discussion of soaking outside of approved ecclesiastical settings. 3. All pink feathers found on campus must be burned. Meanwhile, Deseret Book rushed out a new devotional titled Madame Paterini, Latter-day Saint, Not a Latter-day Spectre. In the book, a hastily compiled narrative claimed that Brigham Morris Young's cross-dressing was simply a humorous theatrical tradition, and not, under any circumstances, to be taken as evidence that early Mormon leaders tolerated gender fluidity. At the same time, apologists got to work. BYU professors flooded social media, arguing that Brigham Morris Young was merely fulfilling his divine role as an entertainer. Well, technically, wrote one BYU scholar on Twitter, we don't know if he actually enjoyed wearing dresses. He was likely doing so under protest, as part of an elaborate celestial test. The debate raged online. Ex-Mormons had a field day. Memes exploded across the internet. A photoshopped image of Nelson in full drag, captioned, "I'm a child of God, and he has sent me here in a fabulous gown." A mock church handbook entry. Cross-dressing is only permitted if the cross-dresser is a direct descendant of Brigham Young and possesses a stunning falsetto. A reworked proclamation to the world, gender is eternal, unless you can absolutely work a corset. Sure. The final blow. The haunted Temple Square incident. Just when it seemed the church had regained control, something even stranger happened. Security cameras at Temple Square picked up a mysterious figure late at night. A soprano voice floated through the empty halls of the Joseph Smith Memorial Building. Tourists at the Beehive House reported seeing a shadowy figure in a ball gown standing in the windows. A missionary at the Salt Lake Temple called in sick after claiming he had felt a cold feather brush against his cheek. Then, in the dead of night, the Salt Lake Temple lights flickered. A soft voice echoed through the empty corridors. "I am a child of God." Security footage cut out. By morning, a single pink feather was found resting on the statue of Brigham Young, the final first presidency decision. Nelson, Oakes, and Holland met one last time. They closed the blinds. They locked the doors. "We need to end this," Holland whispered. "For good," Nelson nodded solemnly.
Continue. Continue reading.
The aftermath. Silence, shadows, and a feather too many. For weeks, the brethren refused to speak of it. The official church stance was clear. It never happened. There had never been a ghost in General Conference. There had never been a pink feather on the statue of Brigham Young. There had certainly never been a cross-dressing son of a prophet who could out-sing the entire tabernacle choir. Church employees were instructed to ignore any mentions of the incident. CES teachers were given strict new guidelines. Do not acknowledge Madame Paterini. Do not answer questions about the conference incident. If a student asks about the pink feather, bear your testimony and move on. For a while, it seemed to work. The faithful saints accepted the silence. They learned to avert their eyes when a pink feather drifted into a sacrament meeting. Church security stopped investigating unexplained Broadway-style music echoing through Temple Square at night. For a while, everything seemed back to normal. The feather returns. Then one morning, a young missionary named Elder Jensen woke up in the Salt Lake Temple dormitory. He stretched, he yawned, he sat up in bed, and there, resting gently on his pillow, was a single pink feather. His heart pounded. He had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. His companion, Elder Brown, peeked over from his bunk. "What's wrong?" Jensen held up the feather. Do you think? Brown's face went pale. "It's impossible," Jensen swallowed. We should report it." Brown shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. We don't talk about it." Jensen frowned. "But," Brown grabbed him by the shoulders. "Listen to me, Jensen. We do not talk about it. We pretend it never happened. We act like it's not real. That's what the brethren want." Jensen hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, you're right." They stood there, staring at the feather. After a long silence, Elder Brown took a deep breath, grabbed the feather, and flushed it down the dormitory toilet. As the water swirled away, they breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe the rumors were just rumors. The lights flicker. That night, Elder Jensen lay awake in bed. Everything was quiet. Then, just past midnight, the lights in the dormitory flickered. A soft breeze ruffled his sheets. And in the distance, from deep inside the temple halls, he heard it. A voice, a soft, ghostly soprano. "I am a child of God, and he has sent me here." Jensen's blood ran cold. His breath hitched. And then, just before the lights went out completely, he saw it. A pink feather, gently floating down from the ceiling. The final testimony. The next morning, Elder Jensen left his mission. His official reason? Personal revelation. But those who knew him, really knew him, whispered something different. That he had seen her. That she had come to him. That Madame Paterini was still here. That she would always be here. And that, No matter how hard they tried, the church could never erase her. Had one last encore. On a quiet night in downtown Salt Lake City, a lone street performer set up outside Temple Square. She wore a Victorian-style gown. She adjusted her lace gloves. She looked up at the temple, smiled, and began to sing. And if you were standing close enough, listening carefully, you might have seen something. A pink feather drifting lazily through the air, and a shadow in the temple window, watching. And if you listened even closer, beyond the voice of the street performer, beyond the sounds of the city, you might have heard it. A soft, ghostly giggle, and somewhere, wherever Madame Patarini's spirit roamed, a knowing whisper on the wind. Nice try, boys, but I told you I'm here to stay.
Well, you young people and your AI, you have no idea what a world you've created. And it's a two-edged sword. And both edges cut the head off the Mormon church. I think that's funny as hell. I could not write, I couldn't even find a human being that could write something as clever. And all I did is I put into AI 4 or 5, 7 different facts. Look what she did. And now the apologetic Mormons will go, oh, he's got an axe to grind. Oh, he made that up. Oh, he secretly put that in. Oh, no. There's no reason to try to prove the Mormon church isn't true. There's no reason to try to prove it's a cult. There's no reason to prove that it's satanic, that it basically lies, it cheats, it steals. That's common knowledge. There doesn't need to be any. The jury is in, folks. The jury is in. Maybe, you're a little bit delayed on what the verdict has been. But anyway, I thought it would be very clever to put that together. I find interest and funniness in that particular document. So anyway, AI knows the Mormon church isn't true. It's just the Mormons don't know the Mormon church isn't true. AI and me and most of the world knows it's a hoax. Have a good day. Thanks.